Hi, Right Writers with Cruz here. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. We are going to be discussing and writing a paragraph on alliteration. So alliteration in poetry, stay tuned. So if that is what interests you today, that is what we will be accomplishing. Thank you so much for again joining me. So today we have a pretty classic poem, Robert Frost, a legend, really. So to put it mildly. So today we're going to be looking at his work, Nothing Gold Can Stay, and we're going to be looking at alliteration in this classic work of his. So alliteration, the first thing I want to do is I want to think about first the definition of alliteration and what that might mean. And so when I think of alliteration, I want to think of repetition of sounds, and specifically, it's when consonants are repeated. So consonants repeated. So when you think of consonants, basically, I want you to think of everything but the vowels. So we're talking about, if we're talking about our ABCs, we're talking about B, C, D, F, G, H, J, K, L, M, N, P, Q, R, S, T, V, W, X, Y, and Z. So when Y does not sound like a vowel. So consonants are everything but the vowels. So just think of this, all letters minus A, E, I, O, U. The alliteration is used for many different reasons. Sometimes it's for rhythm and sound. Sometimes it's for emphasis. And so for me, it's one of those situations where you just have to look at the work and make your argument, make your point on how you feel the alliteration impacts what you are reading. And so let's get right to it. Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. And I'm going to read it again. And so we want to start looking and listening for the consonants being repeated. Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. So we're looking for repetitions of, again, these consonants. And I'm going to start underlining some interesting places here where we notice the repetition of consonants. Very, very intentional and on purpose here. We do hear the F and the flower and that back-to-back, that leaf's a flower. I'm going to be very purposeful and just hyper focus on where we really notice that alliteration. And we know we've got leaf to leaf, Eden sinking to grief, and so and sank. But I'm really going to focus on these very, very intentional, purposeful examples of alliteration. And we've got her hardest hue to hold. In this case, we have the repetition of the consonant H. And then we have, so dawn goes down to day. And in this case, we have the repetition of the consonant D. Now we're going to start heading over to the right side of the screen for our Google Doc. And I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the poem link. And heading back, then we've got our poem. So poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay. And I want you to notice how I am capitalizing, how the poet capitalized it as well. So we've got, the nothing is capital, the N, the G, the C, and the S. So we want to make sure that we do that when we are stating the poem, making sure that we follow the capitalization provided by the poet, by Robert Frost. And now I'm going to set up for my text evidence. And in this case, again, lines from the poem to show, this is my evidence to prove the alliteration, to prove what I'm saying. I'm proving this. These are not my words. I'm going to put quotation marks around them because they are not my words. But these lines from the poem will prove what I'm saying. And we have, so dawn goes down today. If we did not know what hue meant, we would definitely want to look up that word, and you will find out that hue is referencing color, the color of something. So I'm just going to put that in there. So color. All right, we're going to expand here. And we're going to look at the alliteration that we have for this poem. And we've got the repetition or the alliteration for the letter H. And then here we have the letter D. And we can really begin to see this a little bit of emphasis here with her hardest hue to hold. And so dawn goes down today. So let's take a look at how we're going to set this up in a middle school paragraph format. I'm going to go ahead and do some bolding here and some highlighting. So we're going to make that bold and some underlining as well. And we're looking specifically at alliteration. That is our topic. Notice how we're, again, hyper-focusing, and we're using a poem that is approachable, completely approachable, so that we can spend more time focused on what we are saying, setting ourselves up for success by selecting something that we can read, that, again, is approachable, that is readable, is user-friendly. And we want to set ourselves up for success by doing that. So now we're going to go into our piece here and thinking about how we're going to set this up for alliteration. Always, I begin with the title. And again, this is my process because it allows the reader to know what my topic is, the name of the poem, who wrote the poem, and I'm specifying, again, what I'm talking about here. So my focus is on alliteration. So in this case, I'm going to start with the writer's name. So Robert Frost, it's pretty epic. So if we want to include some personal opinion, I say go for it. Robert Frost's epic poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay. Uses alliteration. Now again, keeping it super basic and just identifying that alliteration is there, and we will save the longer analysis for our high school version. But sometimes, again, I like to level up because, we have advanced young people out there who can definitely handle this. Robert Frost's epic poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay, uses alliteration. Remember, we want to give our readers the definition because we never assume that the person who is reading this knows what alliteration is. Let's tell them what it is so that we know that we are conveying our message our message is being sent, because again, we're the writer, so we control the message. We control what we're saying. And even when we said epic poem, that's revealing something about ourselves. So we're giving the reader a little bit of our personal opinion and letting this reader know, hey, this work is pretty important. And I think so, and I'm letting you know that. Alliteration is when writers, I'm going to change this up. Alliteration is when consonant sounds are repeated for, we're going to keep this effect, and we may come back to this idea of emphasis. So here's what we have so far. Robert Frost's epic poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay, uses alliteration. My topic is alliteration. I have the poem's name, Nothing Gold Can Stay. I've told my reader that it is a poem and it's written by Robert Frost. Alliteration is when consonant sounds are repeated for effect. Now, I want to look at what lines he uses her hardest hue to hold. And so dawn goes down today. So I'm going to go back to this for a moment. And so this is line 2. This is a one stanza poem. So this is used in line 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in lines 2 and 7. So I can be a little bit more specific in my writing. So that's why I wanted to go ahead and identify that. So are repeated for effect. In line 2, Frost, and really, he's sort of making a point and arguing. So Frost argues that nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. So it's basically letting us know that it's hard to hold on to the color of gold. And again, I think, and that's why these two are being used for some emphasis here, because we've got this idea of dawn going down to day. So this idea of gold, when it is the sun first begins to rise in the morning. And so he's basically arguing that gold is the hardest color for nature to hold on to. So I'm going to go here and say in line 2, Frost argues that the color gold, Frost argues that it is difficult. Let me see how I can put this, because I really want her in there. And we know that he's using personification here. I'm going to change this up by stating or saying in line 2. I'm going to say stating. By stating in line 2, alliteration is when consonant sounds are repeated for effect. Frost does this in line 2 when he states in line 2, her hardest hue to hold. Frost does, alliteration is when consonant sounds are repeated for effect. Frost does this in line 2, her hardest hue to hold, to emphasize the difficulty, to emphasize how difficult it is for nature to keep the gold, because really it's the sun, it's the sun is rising. And so that first rise of the sun, and everything is gold and everything sort of shines and glimmers. So alliteration is when consonant sounds are repeated for effect. Frost does this in line 2, her hardest hue to hold, to emphasize how difficult it is for nature to keep the gold of the morning sun. I think this sort of, it's almost as if we're lingering here into the high school version for this one with our alliteration, to emphasize how difficult it is for nature to keep the gold of the morning sun. Later, in line 7, and that's what lets me know that there is an emphasis on this idea of these two are connected. The fact that nature has a hard time holding on to the gold. And so dawn is that morning sun. So dawn represents that, and dawn has already happened. And now we've gone on to the rest of the day. And so this is what's fabulous about this section here, because we've highlighted that example of alliteration of that repetition. And these two lines support one another, which is really awesome when we're writing because, again, it's really proving the point. Robert Frost's epic poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay, uses alliteration. Alliteration is when consonant sounds are repeated for effect. Frost does this in line 2, her hardest hue to hold, to emphasize how difficult it is for nature to keep the gold of the morning sun. Later in line 7, he reinforces this emphasis through more alliteration when saying, so dawn goes down today. Therefore, Frost, okay, then I take a moment and review. Robert Frost's epic poem, reread, Nothing Gold Can Stay, uses alliteration. Alliteration is when consonant sounds are repeated for effect. Frost does this in line 2, her hardest hue to hold, to emphasize how difficult it is for nature to keep the gold of the morning sun. Later in line 7, he reinforces this emphasis through more alliteration when saying, so dawn, by saying so dawn, when saying, so dawn goes down today. Therefore, Frost uses the repetition of these consonants. Therefore, Frost uses the repetition of the consonants H and D to argue or persuading, really. Frost uses the repetition of the consonants H and D. That sounds a bit awkward. I think I want to take that out. I don't need to say H and D. Therefore, Frost uses the repetition of these consonants, of the consonants H and D, the repetition of consonants. I'm just going to go a little bit broader. Therefore, Frost uses the repetition of consonants to persuade. Really to make his point, to argue his point that gold is the hardest hue to hold, and that it's really about the passage of time. So therefore, Frost uses the repetition of consonants to persuade, and really we're sort of his audience, that nothing gold can stay. So Frost uses the repetition of consonants to persuade his audience that or to persuade, to argue how quickly time passes. I want that in there, but I need to fix that last sentence. Therefore, Frost uses the repetition of consonants to argue do I want to say emphasize again? To reinforce, I've said that. I've said emphasize, I've said emphasis. to again, to argue. Argue sounds pretty strong and harsh. So to warn, is he warning us of how quickly time passes? Frost uses the repetition of consonants to demonstrate, to show how quickly time passes. I'm going to go with that one. And I feel pretty comfortable with that. So we've got our middle school, paragraph example here for alliteration. And now we're going to go to our high school or ENC 1101 paragraph. Again, definitely a classic epic work here by Frost. So again, using some of the same, and I think I want to, I want to make sure that I elaborate on the why. I think we did a pretty decent job above, because again, and that's what's great about very, these approachable poems. They're very approachable, they're readable, we can connect to them easily, and we just, it seems pretty obvious, but again, we want to state the obvious. We want to be intentional about what we are saying. Do not try to hide it. Be as, what I say, I use this word explicit, and I use it in a different way where there's no mystery. So reveal that mystery. Let's reveal it. Let's talk about it in our writing. So this hardest hue to hold, this idea of, again, nature trying to keep the gold of the morning sun. And so that gold morning sun, it's so quiet and peaceful. Yet, and then, our day begins and the passage of time and how fleeting it is. Time, it goes by so fast, and the older you get, the faster it goes. Older you get, the faster it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of include that. And you really don't recognize that until you're older. And then you say to yourself, what happened? Where did time go? So for those of you who are not there yet, it's just one of those things, and adults talk about it. And then all of a sudden you find yourself becoming an adult, and you're there and you're thinking to yourself, they were right. So you just, you don't really realize it until that time comes. So, all right, let's go ahead and continue. I digress here, and we're going to get back to our poem. We're going to really use a lot of what we have here. So I'm going to hit my Control C, and I'm going to go to my Control V, but I'm going to move some stuff away. And, I definitely want to level up my vocabulary, and I want to expand a little bit more on this idea of passage of time. It's fleeting, it's the older you get, the faster it goes. So let's see. Let's take away some of our opinion in our high school version here. And Robert Frost's poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay, uses alliteration. Alliteration is when consonant sounds are repeated for effect. Frost does this through the consonants H and D. This time I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. Through the consonants H, through the consonant H, the consonants H and D. For example, I'm going to add some more transition words here. For example, I could say for example or for instance. For example, in line 2, her hardest hue to hold emphasizes how difficult it is for nature to keep the gold of the early morning sun. And I'm going to go ahead and and put this gold in quotation marks as well. So emphasizes how difficult it is for nature to keep the gold of the early morning sun. Later in line 7, he reinforces, and I'm going to add he persuasively reinforces this emphasis through more alliteration, via more alliteration, through more alliteration. He persuasively reinforces this emphasis with further alliteration, when stating, so dawn goes down to day. Therefore, Frost uses the repetition of consonants to show how quickly time passage, to emphasize. So thinking of synonyms for emphasize, so emphasis, to highlight, to highlight, how quickly time passes. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Robert Frost's poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay, uses alliteration. Alliteration is when consonant sounds are repeated for effect. Frost does this through the consonants H and D. For example, in line 2, her heart is two to hold, emphasizes how difficult it is for nature to keep the gold of the early morning sun. Later in line 7, he persuasively reinforces this emphasis with further alliteration when stating, so dawn goes down to day. Okay, I need a sentence here before I go into therefore. And to emphasize again, dawn goes down to day, the passage of time, fleeting. When stating, so dawn goes down to day. Here, the morning sun has risen, and soon so dawn goes down today. Here the morning sun has risen, and it is now late afternoon. Here the morning sun has risen, and it is now afternoon. So dawn goes down to day. So, I mean, when you think of daytime, it's sort of probably between the hours of sort of 11 and 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. So here the morning sun has risen and the afternoon is here. And the afternoon has arrived. Therefore, Frost uses, and I'm going to stay away from my therefore, and I'm going to go with indeed. I love indeed as well. It's a great transition word. And indeed is really to emphasize. So if you want to emphasize your point, use that word as a transition word and begin with it. And that really just sort of hammers in your point here. Indeed, Frost uses this repetition, this repetition of consonants to highlight how quickly time passes. Okay, let me go back to it one more time. Robert Frost's poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay, uses alliteration. Alliteration is when consonant sounds are repeated for effect. Frost does this through the consonants H and D. For example, in line 2, her hardest hue to hold, emphasizes how difficult it is for nature to keep the gold of the early morning sun. Later, in line 7, he persuasively reinforces this emphasis with further alliteration when stating, so dawn goes down to day. Here, the morning sun has risen and the afternoon has arrived. Indeed, Frost uses this repetition of consonants to highlight how quickly time passes. I feel pretty good about that. I am confident with what I have here. And I feel pretty good about how this is set up. So I am going to take a moment. I'm going to go back up to this middle school version here, and I'm going to go ahead and highlight it really by putting quotation marks around this gold. So again, we went a little bit deeper. Some may argue quite a bit deeper for our high school version or our, ENC 1101 version to think about alliteration. And specifically Robert Frost's epic poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay. Such a beautiful work. Thank you, Robert Frost, for this epic piece. I appreciate you all. Thank you, Right Writers, for sticking it out again with Cruz here. And I hope that this expansion, this elaboration, this in-depth analysis of alliteration really helps you to understand writing and just how important it is to stay on topic, to hyper-focus with just one point, one topic, one point to allow you the opportunity to go deep and really write with intention, with integrity, and purpose. So I appreciate you all, love you all. Thank you. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.